Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. A quiet stretch of Route 283 winds through the darkness, its guardrails glinting under scattered streetlights. On this road, in the dead of night, a 17-year-old girl is about to lose her life. Not in the way anyone will first assume, not in a simple accident. This looked like nothing more than a terrible car wreck, a speeding vehicle, a curve taken too fast, a guardrail torn apart like ribbon. But the truth was far more sinister than anyone imagined, and uncovering it would require painstaking detective work, forensic science, and the courage of people who refused to let Samantha's death be written off as an accident. The following account is based on official police records, coroner's reports, forensic reconstruction, and eyewitness testimony from the people who lived through this nightmare. To understand what happened to Samantha Heller, you have to understand who she was. She grew up in a small neighborhood in Lancaster County where the houses sit close together and everybody knows their neighbors. Her best friend lived right across the street, a gold house on one side, a red and white house on the other. They met in 7th grade when Samantha's mother walked right over.
Her mom just came right over the street and asked me if I wanted to go get school supplies with her. And, yeah, we've been best friends ever since.
She brought me out of my shell, her friend recalled.
She would always make me laugh, and she would always bring sunshine wherever she went. That was just the kind of person she was.
The connection that Samantha and I had with each other was like a sister, she said. It really affected me when she was gone. It felt like I lost a friend and a sister. In her senior year of high school, Samantha enrolled in the veterinary assistant program, working toward the dream she'd had since she was a little girl caring for animals. Her classmates remembered her the same way everyone did. Sam was such a spitfire, one of them said.
She was so outgoing, she was so bubbly, and she talked to everyone. She'd go right up to them. She didn't care. Hi, my name is Samantha. She was so goofy. So goofy.
Another friend described the trust between them.
We were able to talk about everything with each other without kind of the worry of, either me or her judging each other. There was never any kind of that. When I found out what happened, it just threw me into a state of shock. I didn't think it was true. I didn't know what happened, but when I found out she was in the car with Ben, it just hit me like a brick.
Samantha met Benjamin Klinger when she transferred to Lancaster Mennonite High School. Ben was a senior, which in her eyes made him cool. He was a bigger guy, kind of scruffy, and he had that bad boy energy that drew her in. He came from a pretty well-off family, which added to the allure.
He did all the right things, said all the right things. She just fell in love. He was sweet to her. They really felt like they were each other's person. And I think that's just what drew them together.
And what came next would set Samantha on a path toward the worst night of her life. It started slowly, the way it always does. Arguments that seemed normal at first, fights that blew over, breakups followed by makeups. Samantha would text her best friend about it. We had a fight, she'd say, almost casually. But the fights weren't every once in a while. They were every other week. Fight, makeup, fight, breakup. And as the months wore on, the pattern grew darker. Ben accused Samantha of seeing other people. She accused him of cheating. He told her she was lying so often that she started to not believe in herself. I just saw the life draining from her, her friend said. It's really depressing.
Main thing she told me was she thought that he would change. That she saw good in him, and she thought that if she stuck around long enough, maybe he'd be better.
Then came the day Samantha walked into school with a large, dark bruise on her shoulder. Her friend asked what happened. The answer was chilling. Ben had shoved her against a refrigerator. It really put it into perspective that he's physically hurting her, her friend said.
It really put it into perspective that he's physically hurting her. And then they broke up.
She was hanging out with me in the city, and she took out her diary, and she read a couple of pages from it where Ben and her got in an argument, and he ran over her foot with his car on purpose. I told Samantha she had to choose between talking to him and talking to me because I couldn't watch her go through more abuse. So I gave her an ultimatum, and
the friend recalled, and she said she'd make things better, and that was the last thing she said to me. But the abuse extended beyond physical violence. Samantha eventually wrote a detailed letter describing the full scope of what Ben had done. He was very manipulative and narcissistic, she wrote.
She wrote that Ben had provocative photos of Samantha on his phone, and Samantha was a minor, and Ben was not, so it was technically child pornography.
Under the law, those images constituted child pornography. Worse still, Ben had been sending those photographs to his friends. Ben was taking photos of Sam without her clothes on, and he was sending them to all of his friends.
Sam's mom was pressing charges and put a restraining order against him. And Samantha was very embarrassed about it, because she didn't want to make anyone mad.
Samantha was mortified, not because of what Ben had done to her, but because of the public attention the charges brought. She was embarrassed. She didn't want to make anyone angry. And then something happened that investigators would later identify as a critical piece of the puzzle. Just a few days before her death, Samantha Heller walked into the office where her case was being handled. She was there to discuss whether she wanted to drop the criminal charges against Ben, and it became apparent to the people in that room that she felt pressured by Klinger to do exactly that. Investigators would also discover a handwritten note from Samantha that listed the things she wanted from Ben. Among them was restitution, which meant child support. Samantha believed she was pregnant. She had texted a friend late one night to say so.
Samantha texted me one night late on a weekend, and she's like, I think I'm pregnant. She's like, I'm pregnant. And I was like, to who? Like, let me guess. And that was my final straw.
She had even visited Planned Parenthood, though she left before the test was administered. Whether she told Ben about the pregnancy on the day of the crash is unknown, but investigators believe she did, and they believe his reaction was fury. Because Benjamin Klinger had something else going on in his life, something that made an unwanted pregnancy from Samantha more than inconvenient. He had another girlfriend.
He's saying, well, now she's out of the picture and you and I can be together. If that's not telling, I don't know what is.
If that's not telling, I don't know what is. An unwanted pregnancy from an ex-girlfriend who was pressing criminal charges against him, who had a restraining order on him, who wanted child support that wasn't just a complication. From Klinger's perspective, investigators speculated it was a crisis. He was looking at 18 years of financial commitment and a permanent connection to a girl he was desperate to leave behind. One of Samantha's friends had confided that Samantha had told her if she ever did have a child with Ben, she intended to get child support from him. Samantha wasn't going to disappear quietly. She was going to hold Ben accountable for the photos, for the abuse, and for a child she believed he had fathered. And for a young man who wanted nothing more than to move on with a new girlfriend and a clean slate, that made Samantha Heller the single biggest threat to his future. And then there was the way Benjamin Klinger drove. Everyone who knew him mentioned it. He was a terrifying, reckless driver. He would speed like crazy, and it didn't seem to bother him. One of Samantha's friends remembered a time when Ben drove them to his youth group. He started flying down the highway, and the friend was genuinely scared for her life.
I was so scared for my life. And Sam goes, oh, he always drives that way, you're fine.
So when word initially spread that Ben and Samantha had been in a car crash, people assumed the obvious that he had been speeding and lost control, just an accident. It definitely didn't surprise me. That assumption would not survive the evidence. It was the middle of the night. A man who worked the 6 to 2 shift was driving home with his coworker when he noticed bright headlights surging up behind him on Route 283. The witness came around the curve and saw it roughly half of the guardrail was gone, twisted, shredded. He pulled over, stunned by the scale of the destruction. I kind of was in awe, he said. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. The car had hurtled through that curve at well over 100 miles per hour and struck the guardrail without any attempt to slow down. He was adamant about this detail. No brake lights. And that meant one of 3 things.
Now we have to find out, were there any laws broken? Is there speeding involved? Is there drinking involved? Is there drugs involved? Anything that would lead to a reason why this crash happened.
The witness went down to the wreckage. What he found was a 1,986 Toyota Celica liftback, devastating, crushing damage to the passenger side. The male occupant had ended up outside the vehicle on the passenger side.
The female occupant, her legs started flailing uncontrollably, and it wasn't like she was trying to kick something. It looked more involuntary. Like spastic.
He was unconscious, grunting and groaning, trying to get up a couple of times but unable to manage it. The female occupant was still partially trapped in the wreckage.
It looked like she was part of the car, and eventually she just stopped.
The witness said quietly he had pulled over on a dark highway in the middle of the night, walked down to a mangled car, and watched a girl die. He would carry that memory for the rest of his life. When he called 911, he was asked how many people were in the car.
How many people were in the car altogether?
Okay.
And in the background of that call, you could hear the sounds that would later become some of the most important evidence in the case. When police officers arrived on scene, they encountered a guardrail twisted into what one officer described as a macaroni-like pattern, a corkscrew of mangled metal stretching along the roadside. The Toyota Celica had sustained extensive crushing damage along the entire passenger side. On the ground beside the vehicle, they found two people. A female was lying face down in the grass, and sitting on top of the back of the female was a larger male individual. The female was obviously badly injured. She had a gaping wound on the left side of her face and a gouge out of the back of her neck. The male had major bruising on his hips and near his collar, along with a small scalp wound and a small wound to the back of his elbow. Medical crews arrived and quickly confirmed what the officers had suspected. The female was deceased.
When he is awake, the driver identifies himself as Benjamin Klinger, and he speaks briefly with police. He said he was driving. His girlfriend, Samantha Heller, who was in the back seat prior to the crash. The driver, Ben Klinger, is then packaged up and taken into the hospital. The female is going to remain in that location because now her body becomes evidence.
When the male regained enough consciousness to speak,
an interview happens with Benjamin Klinger at the hospital. He tells a story that he's coming back from Philadelphia. He has his girlfriend, Samantha Heller, in the back seat. She's laying down, sleeping, unbuckled. He feels like he fell asleep and went off the road, and he got ejected out of the vehicle, and he doesn't know what happened after that. He doesn't remember anything about this night. He says he may never know because he has a concussion.
Samantha Heller's body would remain at the scene, because in Pennsylvania, when a person dies, the police hold the body where it is so the deputy coroner's office can conduct its own investigation. The coroner is responsible for determining the cause and manner of death, and that manner can be ruled natural, accidental, suicide, or homicide. At this point in the investigation, nobody knew which it would be. We don't know at this point what we have, one official admitted, but someone was about to find the first clue that would unravel Benjamin Klinger's entire story.
There is evidence of injury and other abnormalities. Laceration, gaping, left side of face with multiple linear cuts noted to the skin flap. The evidence on Samantha's head did not support that she was sleeping in the back seat of the car.
There was evidence of blood transfer from Samantha's body to the ground that suggested she had been rolled over, moved, repositioned. In a standard car crash, victims don't get rolled over after the fact. That detail was unusual enough to change the trajectory of the entire investigation. As a result of what we saw, the deputy coroner explained, we thought it important to bring the decedent to the coroner's office for further investigation. Samantha Heller's body was brought in exactly as it had been found at the scene, fully clothed, wearing furry boots, her long blonde hair matted with blood. The forensic pathologist and deputy coroner examined her from head to toe before performing the autopsy. And almost immediately, the evidence began to contradict Benjamin Klinger's story. The injuries on Samantha's body were incompatible with someone sleeping in the back seat of a car. The damage was concentrated on her right side, the passenger side. There was a large, gaping laceration on the left side of her face, with multiple linear cuts on the skin flap, all consistent with a guardrail tearing through the firewall of the car on the passenger side and striking her directly. If she had been lying in the back seat, as Klinger claimed, she would not have sustained those injuries. The evidence on her head, the pattern of her wounds, the location of the trauma, none of it supported the backseat story. She had been sitting upright in the front passenger seat when the car hit the guardrail. That much was certain, and there was more. A distinctive mark on Samantha's chest, a bruise in the shape of an S, thinner than the width of a standard seatbelt, told its own story.
And that tells us that the belt is hanging loose on her body. So when he hits the guardrail, what does she do? She spins, and she's taken a direct hit from a guardrail. So when the vehicle comes to a stop, Samantha is rolling out onto her back. And we know that she does this because of the blood evidence that's present at the scene that is found.
Benjamin Klinger had lied about the most basic facts of the crash. We were initially told that this was simply a car crash, the coroner said, but our findings suggested otherwise. Still, a lie about seating position doesn't prove murder. Maybe Klinger was disoriented. Maybe the concussion scrambled his memory. Those were possibilities the investigation had to account for. But what came next, during the full autopsy, eliminated any remaining doubt about the nature of Samantha's death. There are different ways to conduct a post-mortem examination. Sometimes a visual survey survey is sufficient, but when the cause of death is unclear, the pathologist performs an open autopsy removing the front of the chest plate, examining each organ individually, photographing everything. In Samantha's case, the open autopsy was necessary, and the findings would shake the investigation to its foundation. In the neck and occipital region near the base of Samantha's skull, the pathologist found evidence of hemorrhage. Her neck had been hyperextended, bent violently backward. This type of injury was not the routine scenario seen in automobile accidents, particularly not in a frontal or side impact like this one. It was abnormal, it was alarming, and it demanded an explanation. One possibility was that it resulted from Benjamin Klinger's weight on top of her. He had been found sitting on her back, pressing her face into the ground. That could cause hyperextension. But the pathologist found something else, something that pointed to a cause of death entirely separate from the crash itself. In Samantha's eyes, the pathologist discovered petechiae, tiny pinpoint hemorrhages that look like scattered red dots. Petechiae occur when the smallest blood vessels rupture due to a sudden, sustained increase in pressure, and they are a classic indicator of one specific cause of death: asphyxia, suffocation, the inability to breathe. The forensic determination was devastating in its clarity. Samantha Heller had not died from injuries sustained in the car crash. She had survived the impact with the guardrail, and then she had been asphyxiated, smothered until she could no longer breathe. That type of finding is often found in individuals that die from asphyxia.
And that type of finding is often found in individuals that die from asphyxia. Not getting enough oxygen and struggling to breathe. This suggested to us that the cause of death was asphyxia.
This was potentially a murder, disguised as a car accident. And when investigators went back and listened carefully to the 911 call from the scene, what they heard in the background confirmed their darkest suspicions. Behind the voices of the witnesses and the emergency dispatcher, you can hear Samantha Heller screaming, not moaning, not whimpering, screaming, blood-curdling, desperate screams. She was alive after the crash, even as the words were muffled and strained. She was screaming, "Get off me, get off me."
With injuries, just past the mounts right up there. Hurry.
How many people were in the car altogether? 2 people.
2.
Okay.
At the time of the crash, Samantha Heller was 17 years old. His own daughter was 17. As a father, he said, I find it hard to separate that. And there's this emotional roller coaster that you go on. I can't imagine, as a father, getting a phone call from a police officer at 2 or 3 in the morning saying your daughter is dead. The investigation had reached a critical turning point. Homicide by vehicle can occur unintentionally when gross negligence is involved. But when there is intent, when someone means to do harm that is no longer negligence, that is murder. The central question now was whether Klinger was genuinely unconscious and unaware he was sitting on a dying girl, or whether he had deliberately suffocated her after the crash. To answer that question, investigators needed 2 things: the full story of the relationship and its trajectory toward violence, and irrefutable forensic proof that Klinger's account of the crash was a fabrication. The investigators were trained in exactly this kind of work. They knew how to go back days, weeks, even months, to determine the chain of events leading up to what they called the finale of violence. The Major Crimes Unit was activated. To get a true, clear, and accurate picture of the relationship between these 2 individuals, they tasked police to conduct victimology, gathering as much information about Samantha Heller as possible. Who was she? What was her background? What was the nature of her relationship with Benjamin Klinger? And they needed the same depth on Klinger himself. Investigators fanned out across the community, knocking on doors, sitting down with friends and family members, and slowly assembling a timeline of a relationship that had gone from teenage romance to something monstrous. Before anyone could be charged, the investigators needed to answer a question that had nagged them from the start. Could they prove that Benjamin Klinger was lying about being ejected from the car? If he had been thrown free on impact, there was at least a sliver of a scenario in which he might have ended up on Samantha without conscious intent. But if he was wearing his seatbelt, if he had deliberately unbuckled, climbed out, and positioned himself on top of her, then his story fell apart completely, and the only remaining explanation was murder. Before I was going to take any further steps, the lead investigator said, I needed to hear from the reconstructionist. The forensic experts were going to make or break this case, and everyone involved knew it. The vehicle itself had to be examined first. Was there a malfunction? Did the brakes fail? Did the steering give out?
You have to look at the car. Was there a malfunction with the vehicle? You're not only trying to see what you can prove, but you have to disprove things. So did the brakes fail? Did the steering wheel fail? So you need the inspection of the vehicle, and we need to prove that he was absolutely lying about being ejected from the car. So we need to do an autopsy on the car. And if we don't have that, I'm not sure you can prove this case.
The car did exactly what the person behind the wheel told it to do. Then came the accident reconstruction, and investigators knew it. When it comes to prosecuting vehicular homicide cases in court, they are among the hardest to prove, especially when you're arguing intent rather than negligence. The work was led by Officer Jeff Jones, a traffic collision reconstructionist whose expertise in these cases was well established. Jones became consumed by the investigation. It ruled his daily thoughts, he later admitted. He retraced the route Klinger had driven that night, the same stretch of 283, the same curve, the same guardrail, using a forensic animation program designed to recreate crashes in precise detail. He rebuilt the event from the moment the car left the road to its final resting position, including the positions of both Klinger and Samantha Heller, as the police found them. 3 facts established by the eyewitness were crucial to the reconstruction. First, Klinger's speed well over 100 miles per hour. Second, the complete absence of brake lights, even through the curve. And third, the eyewitness watched Klinger navigate the curve and leave the road in real time.
Samantha is down on the ground, in the grass, head stuffed into the ground, shoulders stuffed into the ground. And this is a straight-on, head-on collision. That body is not going to get in that position from that type of collision.
Each of those facts answered one question, but raised several more. The physical evidence at the crash site told the rest of the story. The car left the roadway and struck an attenuator, the end cap of the guardrail designed to absorb impact. Then the guardrail began to twist into a riveting pattern as the still rotating vehicle tore through support post after support post. The car finally turned and slid down a small embankment, coming to rest in the tall grass with the passenger door open. That final position was where Samantha Heller died. But the single most critical piece of evidence in the entire reconstruction was the seatbelt. Benjamin Klinger claimed he was ejected from the car. If true, he would not have been wearing his seatbelt, and his presence on top of Samantha could theoretically be explained by the physics of the crash. But the forensic evidence obliterated that claim. The indentation of Klinger's belt buckle was so deep that it had left a permanent imprint on the webbing of the seatbelt itself. This guy was buckled tight like a NASCAR driver, Officer Jones said, which says one thing: I want to survive. The evidence was overwhelming and came from 3 independent sources. First, the bruises on Klinger's body matched exactly where the seatbelt restraints would have been positioned. Second, despite the extreme force of the crash, Klinger had not gone through the front windshield, which would have been inevitable in an unbelted frontal impact. And third, the seatbelt itself was undamaged, not cut, not ripped, not torn by the force of ejection. It had been unbuckled, taken off deliberately, by hand. With Klinger's ejection story demolished, the reconstruction team pieced together exactly what happened after the car came to rest.
So when he hits the guardrail, what does she do? She spins, and she's taken a direct hit from a guardrail. So when the vehicle comes to a stop, Samantha is rolling out onto her back. And we know that she does this because of the blood evidence that's present at the scene that is found by Dr. Diamantoni and the forensic pathologist.
The car had not rolled, it had not flipped. There was no physical mechanism, none that could explain how Benjamin Klinger ended up outside the driver's side of the vehicle and on top of Samantha on the passenger side unless he unbuckled his seatbelt, climbed or walked out of the car, moved around the vehicle, and deliberately positioned himself on top of her.
As a result of reconstruction that was done by Officer Jones, we officially determined with certainty in the manner of death was homicide.
With the forensic case now airtight, investigators turned to the question of motive. What drove Benjamin Klinger to murder a 17-year-old girl on a dark highway? The answer had been building for months, visible in fragments to everyone who knew them, but devastating in its totality. The domestic violence that escalated from verbal abuse to physical assault, the criminal charges for distributing intimate images of a minor, the restraining order, the intimidation campaign to make Samantha drop those charges, culminating in that visit to the prosecutor's office just days before her death. Each element alone was alarming. Together, they formed a portrait of a young man who saw Samantha Heller not as a person but as a problem that was growing more dangerous to him by the day. And then came the pregnancy. Samantha had confided in friends multiple times about possible pregnancies before, but this time felt different. Investigators needed to determine whether Samantha was actually pregnant. Her body was brought back to the coroner's facility for additional testing. Her ovaries, fallopian tubes, and uterus were carefully evaluated. A post-mortem pregnancy test was ordered. Blood work was drawn to test for HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, the hormone that confirms pregnancy and can even indicate how far along a pregnancy has progressed. The results came back.
Ultimately, we found that she was not pregnant.
What mattered was what Benjamin Klinger believed. He believed Samantha was pregnant. She believed she was pregnant. She was demanding child support. She was pressing charges that could send him to prison. She was a living, breathing obstacle to the future. He wanted a future with a different girlfriend, free from criminal prosecution and financial obligation. And then there was his behavior after the crash behavior that revealed something deeply unsettling about the kind of person Benjamin Klinger was behind the facade.
There's also, and this is disturbing, there's also pictures of Ben posing on social media of him in bandaged hands and looking into the camera, smiling or smirking. So what do you conclude from that, other than, man, this is evil?
They wanted to follow the facts, to let the evidence lead rather than speculation. You still have to have the proof, but by this point, the proof was overwhelming. The district attorney reviewed the totality of the evidence, the forensic reconstruction, the autopsy findings, the seatbelt proof, the motive, the history of domestic abuse, the 911 recording with Samantha's screams in the background, the eyewitness account of a car traveling over 100 miles per hour with no brake lights, the social media photographs of a smirking young man with bandaged hands, and made the determination. They had enough to go forward. They had enough to prosecute Benjamin Klinger for murder. Justice. On December 22nd, law enforcement converged on Benjamin Klinger's home. They surrounded the house, brought him out, and placed him in handcuffs. He was transported to the Mannheim Borough Police Department, and as he sat there in custody, facing the consequences of what he had done,
There sits one of the most evil teenagers I've ever seen in my life.
the prosecution had assembled what they believed was a mountain of evidence supporting a charge of first-degree murder. They could prove Klinger had lied about Samantha's position in the car. They could prove he was wearing his seatbelt and was never ejected. They could prove he deliberately unbuckled himself, walked to where Samantha lay screaming and bleeding, and suffocated her. They could present the full history of domestic violence, the motive built on pregnancy and criminal charges, and a new girlfriend, the eyewitness who watched the car fly through a curve at 100 miles per hour with no brake lights. He claimed he didn't remember anything. He said he was ejected from the car. He said Samantha was in the back seat. Every single one of those claims had been proven false. He walked out of the car on his own. He took his seatbelt off. He walked around to where Samantha lay and sat on her head. Well, that's not a coincidence, one investigator said flatly. That's murder.
I was extremely confident we would convict him of first-degree murder. But it's not that easy, because there was a lot of information that was going to come out about Samantha that was going to be difficult for her mother to listen to. We'd have to go through every single broken bone. We had to go through all the domestic violence, the charges, and the history between the two of them.
Friends who knew her well said they didn't believe she could handle it, not mentally, not emotionally.
Samantha's mom was not in a right state of mind after Sam died. I don't think she could handle it mentally at the time or emotionally. I think that she wanted it to be over as soon as possible. And if that meant that he got whatever sentence she deemed fit, she would do it.
In the end, a plea agreement was reached with the consent of Samantha's mother. Benjamin Klinger pleaded guilty to third-degree murder. The total sentence handed down was a minimum of 28 years to a maximum of 56 years of incarceration in a state correctional institution. That means Klinger must serve at least 28 years before he is eligible for any possibility of release. For the investigators and forensic experts who had poured their hearts into this case, the outcome brought relief but not full satisfaction. The lead coroner expressed pride in his team.
I'm incredibly proud of the people we have. I'm proud of the working relationship that we have with law enforcement. I'm always happy when we can find truth. I think it's essential that we do that in each and every case, and making sure that individuals are brought to justice who are responsible for crimes.
Reflected on the difficulty of these cases. When it comes to prosecuting these cases in court, they're the hardest cases to prosecute, he acknowledged. But the science had been clear, the evidence overwhelming, and the conclusion inescapable.
When I heard about the plea deal, I was upset because I just don't believe that a person like him should be in society, allowed to walk free in society. And I don't know if he'll ever learn his lesson.
Samantha's funeral filled a large, beautiful church to capacity. People lined up out the door. Her best friend stood at the podium and spoke. She tried to make the message clear that Samantha was someone who mattered to all of them, that she had a bright future ahead of her, that it had been taken far too soon, that she was a good girl with a good heart.
Samantha's mom came to me crying, showing me the last text that Sam had sent her, saying, "I love you, Mom."
They stood there together, crying, holding on to each other and onto the memory of a girl who deserved so much more than what she got. The friend who had given Samantha the ultimatum, choose between Ben and me, still carries that weight. She had walked away because she couldn't bear to watch the abuse continue. For the friend who feared Ben because of his overall aura, because of everything Sam had told her, it was impossible not to see him as anything other than a monster. The reason I was scared of Ben, she said, was because of his overall aura. He was just a scary person. And, knowing what he had done to the girl she loved, like a sister, that fear would never go away. Samantha's best friend still lives across the street from the house where they grew up together. The gold house on one side, the red and white house on the other. The same front steps where they used to sit after school and talk about whatever had happened that day. Anytime that I look at that house, she said quietly, I still think of Samantha. Her friend wanted the world to know why this story matters. She was taken from this world way too early by someone evil, she said. And I want the story to go out there so other girls who are in this situation can see where Sam was, and maybe they can save themselves before they get put in a situation like this. Samantha Heller was 17 years old. She was a spitfire, a goofball, a girl who walked up to strangers and introduced herself with a fearless smile. She wanted to work with animals. She wanted a family. She wanted a cookie-cutter house with a white picket fence. She deserved every single bit of that future. Instead, her life was stolen on a dark stretch of Pennsylvania highway by the person she trusted most in the world. She was a good girl, she had a good heart, and she is not forgotten. This case is a reminder that evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it wears a familiar face. Sometimes it sits across the dinner table. Sometimes it drives you home on a quiet night and makes sure you never arrive. If you'd like to see select new videos early and help us keep uncovering case files that rarely come to light, you'll find extra footage and unseen details on our Patreon.